group of the Commission on the Future of Public Education in Vermont. Just do a very quick roll call. Peter.
Hi, Peter Conlon from the Vermont House.
Rebecca.
Rebecca Samaroff, Deputy Commissioner, Vermont Department of Taxes.
Nicole.
Nicole Mace, representing the Vermont School Boards Association.
Jennifer.
Good morning, Jennifer Deck Samuelson, Chair of the Vermont State Board of Education.
And Zoe.
Hi, good morning, Zoe Saunders, Secretary of Education.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm Megan Roy, Chair of the Commission, de facto member of the steering group. Just really quick, I don't believe are there any amendments to our agenda. We're really debriefing the meeting and talking about where we go next. So sounds like that is what we will do. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from April 21st?
So moved.
The date right this time. Thanks, Nicole. A second?
Sure, I'll second.
Thanks, Peter. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, we are on time. I think our two agenda items will merge somewhat. So we'll spend a few minutes briefing the meeting from this morning and agenda planning, which really means next steps. Just in terms of, I think we're centering around two main questions without sort of recapping, but we will want to have a discussion around pausing the input sessions and or pausing commission meetings. I think those are the two main pieces, but I'll open it up for a meeting debrief.
Is there a place where all the dates of the public input session are listed? Is that on the commission's website?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me open it in front of me so that I can at least look at them. So if you go, I was going to put it in the chat. We don't have chat yet. It's right on the main page of the commission website, and I can read them off for those attending. But it is relevant because it comes up this week. So May 22nd, May 28th, May 29th, and June 11th are the remaining virtual sessions.
And on the registration page, does it say what the purpose is? Or is
I
it just?
believe, oops, clicked on the one that was over.
Really?
I'm trying to remember, but because I filled it out, and you have to fill it out to be able to enter the meeting, but I think I just had to provide my name, email, who I was. I don't think it gave an agenda of topics.
Right. I don't see it. I don't see it like a purpose, I guess. Statement.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we could do, although I suspect it would need to just be put on the website because of accessibility, the save the date card, which has the purpose of the sessions, at least at a high level, because we keep it at a high level, is sort of a texty PR type card. So that would probably have to be modified. I also would just say the reason for the registration and the collection of some demographic information is because the hope was to see who is not participating. So that, right, like these are meant to be part of a more long-term process, and so often would be figuring out who's not in discussions and how do we let folks. So just aside. I'm going to back up actually because I know Zoe, you weren't able to make the meeting, but in general, we had a conversation around the bill that passed out of Senate Finance. Lots of conversation, although that was a more standard here's our reaction. We did that individually as each member. And then that sort of launched into a conversation around, there's 2 weeks left in the session. There is a bill on the table. There are these input sessions happening that are likely not going to be fast enough to provide input to the General Assembly. And it sort of just a more pointed and targeted conversation about the role of the commission. It's work in the next 2 weeks, multiple different perspectives. I don't want to try to rehash it. But the reason these two things came up is because there was a conversation around, is the legislature, do they intend to use the input? What is the input? Is the input better held after the session with a different purpose? There are lots of different conversations on that, but I just wanted to highlight it brought up the conversation that we have had many times, but I think it's in the commission's face right now because of the speed of the process. And also the commission has not been, despite multiple requests, the Senate does not appear to want the commission to come in and testify. And so there is an authenticity, that's my word, but there's an authenticity challenge to invite members of the public to provide input into this body, being the commission, when this body can't assure that that input will be listened to. And then there was a question about, does it make more sense to pause the work of the commission collectively, get through the end of the session, and then we will either be providing reaction to whatever happened. We may be using the input mechanisms for reaction, transition, other things. And then obviously that was a discussion that ensued, and there was agreement to let that discussion happen here, since the steering group is responsible for defending them. And I would say we had a number of not unsurprising public comments at the end of the session, asking the commission not to pass the work for a variety of reasons. So I think the goal is to rehash that discussion.
Can I ask, Megan, so you have been providing updates post-commission meeting to, I know you have regular audience with the House Education Committee, but you've been doing that in writing as well to the members of this. So it's not as though we haven't been sharing. You have taken a very active role in ensuring that the essence of the discussions are in fact shared. I'm not sure if you're also planning to do that with the public input sessions, or if that sounds like there was not a lot of attendance on the Friday session.
Right.
But would that be your intent, to have a summary from Afton that then gets shared?
So a couple of things. First, yeah, every time I testify with House Ed, the written testimony and all accompanying documents, I then send to Senate Ed, Senate Finance, House Ways and Means, and then it's obviously posted on House Ed. The last week's update included Afton's summary of public input to date, and included the save the dates and the input sessions and sort of the transition. And so, yeah, all along, since January, essentially, since the commission said we're going to give you input in real time, that has gone to all of the committees, even if they don't subsequently invite us in. I also reached out to Senate Education right after the initial passage of the revised 454 and asked for an opportunity to speak to them. Have not been asked to speak, and yes, they do get it in writing. They also get the public they have gotten the public input because Afton summarized that And the intention would be that they would get that public input. Afton is collecting themes after every session. They have sort of a raw data version of what was shared with the commission. And then the raw data version would be crafted into talking points, and those would be, so that's a long way of saying yes, the information does get out. I think the light attendance is we don't, someone did say this, we don't want to make over generalize that. There's lots of reasons it could be late on Friday. And it's the first one, but it's not really the first time that we've had the conversation around, it is both confusing and now probably frustrating for some members of the public to engage when there isn't clarity, when we don't even have clarity about the extent to which it's listened to. I don't know if this update is helpful. It's not specific to this morning's meeting, but the Office of Racial Equity, Vermont's Office of Racial Equity, reached out last week after hearing my testimony to have that. Afton had already reached out to them. I also wanted to be clear, they had reached out to that office quite a bit before I heard out, but I heard from I think one of their folks who's responsible for policy. And the person said, oh, really interested in your public input. We'd love to engage with you around how to use our channels to push out, which is great, because that's the whole reason Afton had reached out to them earlier. I believe Aressa from Afton has scheduled a meeting with them this week to push out the input sessions and sort of lift that. So the Office of Racial Equity is engaging in the process. Separate, this was probably a month ago now, I have had individual meetings and conversations with the Vermont Youth Council, who also has quite a few networks. So I think it's important, especially for members of the public, to know that we're not naive to these other audiences, and they are part of the conversation, and they're working with us on how to do that, particularly around students and particularly around, Vermonters. So that's all to say, right now, they're working with us to push out these input session dates. And I think that's relevant to the conversation about whether or not to pause or not. And then the other part is, Afton is set up to just facilitate those on. We've been trying to get commission members to attend them because it is important for commission members to participate. Appreciate, Jennifer, you being available on Friday. Like, I have 2 or 3, I think I have 3 of them plugged into my calendar. The goal is to have as many people attend as possible. But Afton, in a sense, doesn't need us to be present. They are present. So I think that's also important. We got into the conversation because someone raised what are the questions, and it is true that right now it is high level reaction to the 3 policy areas because we have not been given anything. So anyway, just trying to put context to the conversation.
I appreciate that. I would just say, based on that information, and Peter, I think you said the adjournment is hoped for by the end of this month. You said 2 weeks, so which encompasses most of those listening sessions. So the June 11th would be the one where I would say maybe TBD. There's obviously the potential for a veto session, which could, add even a different wrinkle to the mix that we might want public input around. But I guess where I'm landing right now is we've put something in motion. People are working their networks. As long as there is a vehicle to get that input back to the legislature on, if for nothing else, to get it on the record as part of this policy deliberation, then I would support continuing. I think we could do more damage than not in pausing at this point in time. And I do think that it is important that that the input be collected and shared. And if it's not considered, that's not on us.
Mhm. Yeah, that's helpful, Nicole. I think even just from a practical standpoint, it's helpful. And I didn't think to give more background to the rest of the commission. This is not, we're not sort of recruiting commission members to facilitate these sessions. They are prepared. It's part of the work that they've been doing, and they have been quite responsive to the pivot. So I think that makes sense. In my conversation with them, would just need to solidify that mechanism to get the theme back. I don't know the answer to how quickly they can take that raw data. They've done a deep dive from basically August of 2024 through now. So they have the structural component of it. They would just need to reflect it. And frankly, maybe that's just a weekly update to the committees of record in the same way that I the commission itself. Jennifer, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that I'm following, because I thought the general consensus at the regular meeting was to pause the input sessions, but Nicole, I'm hearing you say that you think it's important to keep them. Just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I think the consensus was, well, that the steering group was going to talk about this. And then we heard a lot of public input at the end that, we didn't really talk about. So I think that's important to put in the mix. And I also, we didn't look at the dates really as a full commission. So yeah, I am sharing my perspective at this time is that we not do another pivot. Because I think that is confusing to the public. It's confusing to Afton. What are we doing? And I think there could be some value in continuing to build a record of what Vermonters think about these big policy areas. Because so much, whatever passes this session is a framework. I think there's still a lot of details that need to be worked out. And so input could be helpful in that moving forward. But yeah, sorry, I am voicing a different take than what was emerging from the full commission discussion.
Okay. I mean, that's helpful, because funny word continue, like, do we carry on or continue as in pause? So I wasn't really sure how we were using it. I guess my only concern is if I were a member of the public, I would want to know that showing up to a meeting on May 28th or whatever would have any value to the conversation that's happening at the legislative level. Like, does it even matter? Would it be more efficient to, point people to their legislators at this point? Because I'm all for having these public sessions, but I think, Megan, to your point, to what end? And if it's not going to likely change anything that's being discussed kind of last minute in the General Assembly, I'm not sure that's worth anyone's time.
Thanks, Jennifer. Peter, and then Zoe. This is exactly the conversation we need to have, quite frankly, because those are the two things. Peter?
I think I was going to say I'm agnostic on whether Afton Partners continues its work or not, but actually I think I'm a little more in agreement with Jennifer, just in the sense of setting people's expectations as to the value of their input at a certain point in time of the process. And I was only going to point out that, sort of the legislative process is that something will potentially come out of the Senate or potentially not. We have something already passed in the House, and then we come together and we, the rules are such that we're not supposed to bring in new concepts. It does happen by agreement, but that we're going to be working from a pretty sort of strict set of positions. So, I guess I'm not sure that there isn't more value having public input post session on what ultimately emerges than sort of pre end of session.
Thanks, Peter. Zoe?
I think there's more value in pausing and engaging in these conversations after there's clarity around the next steps. I think 3 points. One, it's important to really be clear and setting expectations in the public around what questions will be asked and how that will directly inform legislation. I think I have a second question around, are we prepared to provide the level of refined input that can be supportive of the decision making that Peter is describing? And then the third is, how do we really maximize the value of these sessions? I think, as Nicole mentioned, this bill will likely be a framework. There will be some decisions made and then clarity around probably what needs to be further considered into next year. At least that's kind of what's been signaled, I think, in the recent conversations. And so there's going to be room certainly for, I think, further input on some really key areas of these, the key policy areas. But I think really going back to the refined input is more of where I would have some questions. I think we have already surfaced a lot of themes, and I'm not sure we've worked on translating to how those themes could inform policy decisions. I think there's a lot of considerations that have been formed, but based on questions or even concerns from the community, I'm not hearing that we have a coherent recommendation for how to best address those concerns or questions. So if the intent is to surface additional questions and considerations, I don't think that's as helpful. What would potentially be helpful is identifying the primary questions and concerns that people feel are outstanding and really be more concrete in identifying the ways in which those questions or concerns could be addressed through policy. That would be valuable, but I'm not sure if Afton Partners is organized in a way to address that. But I guess to summarize my comment, I think continuing to surface many of the similar themes that we've heard over the last year that are questions and concerns may not be valuable. However, translating those questions and concerns into really tactical policy considerations could be, because there are a series of choices that the legislature will need to make around how to strengthen our public education system, and being able to address those questions and concerns in a way that is really head-on and tactical could be valuable. But I think that might change the scope of how these sessions are structured.
So a couple
Does that make
thoughts as I listen to folks. One, I think that Afton's role is as facilitator, not necessarily the translator to policy. That's really our role. I think what they have been trying to do, frankly, in response to us, is to say, how do we bring voices to the conversation in the 3 relevant areas? And you're right, Zoe, that the commission doesn't have time. And when I say doesn't have time, I want to be really clear, because this came up at the meeting. We are actually have been, over the course of the year, structured to take the time. The process has gone on without us, so to speak. And so it isn't that we don't know that our job is to take public input, translate it into policy recommendations, study it, and do all of those things. We have frankly been pulled out of the thoughtful way of doing this work and into a reactive way, because we are trying to maintain a voice. So I just want to offer that as a caveat because of the criticism the commission faces. So yes, Afton would not be the ones to translate it. They would be the ones to facilitate, and in fact, they have offered to facilitate these 5 sessions because they know that it's really difficult for the working professionals on this group to be able to make it happen. The other thought that I'm having when I think about the public input that we've gotten so far is that it is actually important for the legislature to know the concerns that people have around the things being proposed. That is what this would continue to do. I think that, I mean, honestly, it just, and again, you're the steering group, but I think the thing that is jumping out for me right now is that I'm gonna say, I'm gonna wonder whether there's any harm to holding the sessions. And the reason I say that is because they're already organized, they're ready to go. We have some work to do on advertising them, we know that. But we have some pretty important partners, students, Office of Racial Equity, and partners who are trying to get the word out for us. And I do worry about the reputation of the commission, although I believe it's misguided to say that we would be doing a disservice. That's my own personal opinion. I do worry about not only the reputation of the commission, but members on the commission if we cancel, because I don't know that people will be able to understand the reason why we were pausing. So I'm, for acknowledging that there was certainly a direction that it seems the commission was pointing the steering group, and I myself am thinking we would do more harm in sessions than not. And if we can circulate the information back to them, it does not mean that once something happens, depending on what that something is, we will then continue to work with them on what does that mean now. So anyway, that's my thought. Nicole, and then Zoe and Jennifer.
Yeah, I think that we have heard a lot of feedback that the voices that the commission has heard from so far are not representative of all the stakeholders. My observation in our in-person input sessions, it has tended to be predominantly educators who are participating in those. And we have a regular group of members of the public that observe our meetings and comment. Those folks are also well known to me as someone who has, participated in this policy arena for a long time. And so, yes, while we have collected and there are consistent themes, it has been pointed out to us, and I am painfully aware of the lack of input that we've received from a more diverse group of stakeholders. And I think the conversations and the efforts that Afton and others are having to get the word out, to bring folks into the conversation, I think that's important, even if folks are saying the same thing. So that's one point I want to make, is that I think cutting off the effort to incorporate new voices into the conversation before we've even begun feels like a problem. The second is this idea of translating policy input into policy choices. I agree with Megan. That's what this commission was designed to do. And we've never been given the appropriate opportunity to do that, because the political process has moved ahead far faster than we have been able to. Because, we were set up to do this in a thoughtful and deliberative way. And the train left the station well before we even had a good structure in place to do the work. So, if the commission continues to exist, I hope we're the body that can, as I've been saying, kick the tires on and make the connection between the values and the public input that we hear, the policy goals, and the practical realities of our public education system as it exists today, and how we get it to where we want it to be in the future. That's what this body's for. We've not been leveraged in that way, unfortunately. But I don't think we should stop ourselves in our tracks when we've already put out to the community, we've heard you're not listening to us. We've put in place some structures to do that. And now to cancel just feels like a step backward.
Thanks, Nicole. Jennifer or Zoe, I saw your hand go up. So go ahead.
Zoe, did you want to go?
I was just reflecting. Let me think a little bit.
Well, I guess I'm going to say three things. One, I'm going to reiterate what I said at our full meeting, which is, I raised this issue last fall. This commission was set up to be the body that would take in testimony, input from the public, and propose the education reform. And that contemplated a long, deliberative, contemplative process that basically got thrown out the window as soon as the legislature started, and we had other, and I'm not judging this. I'm not saying that it was a wrong result, but what I am saying is, as soon as there was another proposal that got thrown out in January, or proposed in January, that necessarily changed what we were doing in a way that the legislature had not contemplated in creating the commission, and we're not nimble enough to be reacting in live time to things as they're being discussed in the legislature. It's a different model. And I think the problem is, now we've been trying to jam ourselves into this legislative model, which was not, the way I read it, that was not really the intent for the commission. So I think we're now, I think a lot of the struggles and the existential crises that we're facing are born of that reality that the legislature wanted us to be thoughtful, but then they didn't want to take the time for us to be thoughtful. And again, not judging it, I'm just saying, reflecting what I'm seeing. So that was my first point. My second point is, as far as the public input sessions, to what end? Because if there's nowhere for those voices to go in terms of having an effect on what's being deliberated by the General Assembly right now and over the next 2 weeks, it's hard for me to think that that is a good use of anyone's time. But maybe I'm wrong. And so I guess I'm looking for an answer that would say, no, there is an opportunity for people who show up at a meeting on May 28th to have some sort of, to be able to move the needle on this. So that's a second point and a question. And then my third point is, I'm curious how much it is costing us to have these input sessions, because I'm sensitive to the fact that we don't have a lot of money in the state. And again, when I showed up to the meeting on Friday, 50% of the people there were Afton partners. So they're getting paid, I got paid. And, the other two people who showed up are people who routinely show up. I guess my final point is, I know we've been talking for months about reaching out to groups that have not been represented. So my question there is, what are we doing differently now that we haven't been trying to do for the last few months to make us think that we will have more success in having more diverse voices show up to the next 4 engagement sessions?
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm going to answer one small slice of that because I did look at the contract before this meeting, and then I'll go to you, Peter. The Afton, it's a contract with a sum for a body of work, and there is a mechanism with a 30-day notice to end the contract, and then they would be paid for all work that they have done up to date. So it isn't hourly, so to speak. There would be, if everything hit the fan and there was a decision to end their contract, it would be effective 30 days from that decision, and they would be paid for all work beforehand. So in other words, they have already done, you're correct, they haven't facilitated these next 4 sessions, but they've already done a large amount of work. So anyway, that's the point. Like, we don't gain anything necessarily by pausing this immediately. That's not to say that there couldn't be a change to the contract negotiated, but that is beyond the scope of today's meeting. I did just want to answer that part of it. Peter.
Thanks. Like Zoe, I'm sort of sitting here reflecting on what everybody is saying. And I'm finding myself sort of changing positions a little bit because I do worry that we have now sort of activated folks to go out and try to bring in more voices to the sessions that are scheduled. I would hate to sully our reputation and the process's reputation by abruptly saying we're not going to do those, even though I think what we're really saying is we're going to hold for 2 weeks on doing much of anything. So I guess I'm now feeling like, yeah, let's continue on because again, any input is good input, whether it affects the current 2 proposals on the table or the work of the legislature in 2026. It's important to get those voices, and I definitely don't want to do anything to get in the way of getting those voices going. So I find myself feeling differently than I did previously. And I just think it's going to be very important to set people's expectations correctly at these meetings. As to the money, I just would say that this money was appropriated 2 years ago for the task force on school construction. There's been a subsequent task force on school construction. There's still leftover money. And I guess I'm a little less concerned about that. I think that this is probably a good use of it. I would also just say there's no guarantee anything's going to come out of the legislature because we've got such different proposals with such different philosophies behind them. And we still don't know where the governor is on any of this because he hasn't said anything publicly.
Thanks, Peter. Zoe, go ahead.
I think over the last several months, there's been a lot of reflection among commission members around the charge of the commission and how to be most impactful in providing recommendations. I think it's important for us to be really reflective and I think to learn from the experience. I hear sometimes a little bit more of a defensive posture of we were supposed to do this, then we didn't get the timeline, right? But I think the reality was we're working in the same context, and it was very clear early on in our work at the commission that there was a sense of urgency to move quickly, and that sense of urgency was coming from a lot of different stakeholder groups, including educators who were calling on us to make recommendations early to inform even the budgeting cycle. So I think we knew that there was a need to pivot and to make some refinements in our work. And I think some of the changes put us back as opposed to helping us to accelerate the work of the commission. When the proposal came out, that was a real opportunity to build and refine. And I think we took some time even evaluating whether or not to fully engage with a proposal on the table. And I think that put us back. I think we're now in a situation again where we're trying to understand how to navigate through uncertainty. And I think the way to navigate through uncertainty is to ensure that the work the commission is doing is adding value. And that means that the agenda that we put forward has to transcend this next 2 weeks. And the commission, should we choose to move forward with these sessions, would really need to be clear about the role and how the input is really providing relevant information in a future focused way as opposed to within the next 2 weeks. And so I think we really need to ask ourselves if we feel we're in a position to organize and facilitate those meetings in that way. And if we're not, then there's value in putting a pause for 2 weeks to make sure that there's really clarity around what decisions have been made, what decisions haven't been made. That helps us to really think about how to frame a conversation in a way that is going to move things forward really productively, because I think we all agree this work doesn't happen overnight. This is a multi-year, intensive effort to strengthen our public education system. And I'm concerned that if we're narrowing our scope to inform something in the next 2 weeks, it probably is not serving the purpose of the commission, which is really supposed to be driving the future of public education. And so I do think it's a hard conversation, but I think it's one we need to have, and really reflecting on how do we learn and pivot to add value and to think about the ways in which we can structure this to be most supportive in a future focused way, and what part of that will help to inform some of the conversations in the next 2 weeks. I don't know. I think those are some things we have to think about today. Like, what is the actual agenda that we're working on in these sessions? What are we hoping to capture? How are we looking to share that information? And what do we think that will drive in the conversation? I think we really need to be introspective in thinking about what we're hoping to achieve, so that we're doing this in a way that is really impactful and is driving the work. And I think just the nature of the conversation that we're having about whether to pause or not is indicating to me that we're not clear that the agenda we have put forward is really advancing the conversation, or maybe we're not clear around the scope of that conversation. And that gives me pause to move forward, because I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we're really clear on what we're hoping to achieve, and that in respect for everyone's participation, we're making their voices heard, and we're doing that in a way that's really impacting the future of public education in a meaningful way. So I think maybe for me to provide even more feedback, it might be helpful just to reflect on what are we hoping to achieve in these next 2 weeks in the conversation. What are we hoping to capture? What are we hoping to learn? And what do we hope that will inform?
Thanks, Zoe. I just wanted to make a couple comments. One is my observation is a little bit different in terms of the commission's, this, or not the commission, this need to act swiftly. I actually think what the commission has been trying to say and has said is that the magnitude of transformation is such that it needs to be thoughtful and calm and slowed down, frankly. So I don't see it as an unwillingness to switch and pivot because of the speed. I actually see it as a statement in and of itself that this is important. That's my observation. That's a little different than how you described it, Zoe. And I guess there is a lot in there that you shared that we should do before deciding what to do these next 2 weeks. We have about, I can't do that math, 13 minutes left of this meeting. So I don't think that it is why. I would just reiterate, and this is one of those funny places where the structure of the commission is unusual. The steering group, by letter of our charge, is the one who makes this decision. And I would ask, if the steering group does ultimately decide not to have these input sessions, I would ask the steering group to protect that message. It will not come from me as chair. I believe that our individual reputations, in addition to our commission's reputations, ride on. It does not hurt to ask for input in these next 2 weeks. It does not hurt to reflect that input in real time to the General Assembly. There is plenty of time to continue to do that deep work. If this commission is still standing at the end of the legislative session, and we absolutely, this came up at last meeting, then we will need to convene and regroup. I think it is a worthwhile discussion as to what we do as a commission in these next 2 weeks. I see no reason not to let those input sessions go. They are organized, structured, and we have some people continuing to push them out. I do think that it might be worthwhile to say, what does this commission do on June 2nd, and because I think that's our scheduled meeting. So that's my perspective, and it is not me who makes this decision. It is absolutely the steering group. But in this case, I will not. I don't believe it is. I don't think it's a good idea to cancel those sessions. Peter.
Yeah, I guess on balance, I would agree with you. And it certainly it does no harm to hold these listening sessions. It can only be additive. And I will just continue to say the legislature has significant amount of work ahead of it in 2026, for which this input will be really important. If we look at the commonalities of the three proposals, the governor's, the Senate, and the House, we are talking about larger districts. And I think we're going to have to design them and figure them out if any one of these versions sort of takes hold. And I think that getting a diverse array of opinions involved in our decision-making process in that area is going to be vital. So again, I would say not holding them based on what I'm hearing folks say does potential harm. Holding them does no harm. So I guess I'm now feeling much more comfortable with continuing.
Thanks, Peter. Nicole?
Yeah, and I'll just add, the agenda for these sessions has been set for a few weeks now. So it's not like we're coming up with the agenda. It's been set, it's been done once before. They're going to keep doing the same session. So, and given the prospect for the need for continued engagement with the public, the harm that could be done by canceling last minute, I think would impair those efforts down the road. So again, I think it's basically what Peter said. We could do more harm by canceling than we would by proceeding.
Thanks, Nicole. Jennifer?
So I'm not, set on any particular outcome here at all. I'm just really trying to figure out where I'm looking for information. So if we continue with the next 4 scheduled public input sessions, is there room in the commission's budget and Afton's budget to hold more public input sessions that will actually be responsive to whatever passes in the legislature this session, and then informs whatever remains to be addressed in the next legislative session? You know what I'm saying? So, because it would feel important to me that we would want to gather public opinion to help shape what happens, whatever is going to happen. And if we've missed the timeline for affecting change right now, or let me put it a different way, if we've capped our ability to affect what's happening in this legislative session, I would want to ensure that we have ourselves set up in a thoughtful way and have the resources to do it, to help shape the conversation for the next legislative session. So do we have money and resources to accomplish both of those things?
I'll try to answer the logistical part of that. So Afton's original RFP, original contract, what we asked them to do as a commission is to come in to help analyze and propose a framework for engagement, and to refine the one that we had sort of developed in September. And that framework that they proposed back to us as an early version of it had in-person sessions, virtual sessions, a survey, and frankly, a body of work by Afton to train commission members to host, so that they would host some sessions in person, and then they would build capacity so that we could continue. They still have room in their contract. I should have kept it up on my tab. I didn't, so I can grab that information. They do have some in-person time So we are not exhausting their in-person time by using these virtual sessions since the virtual is sort of baked in. I do think you are correct. In some of that in-person time was to come and train us and potentially other partners to be able to continue. That is a mechanism that they flip, because to try to do that fast enough, they flip that based on where we are. So I think it is fair to say we have not missed the opportunity to benefit from that, some of that additional. We aren't sort of using all of the resource now. We will still have some of that resource afterwards. It's a valid question in terms of I think after the session ends, their in-person time is largely devoted to building and training us. It is possible that we would instead ask them to use their in-person time to host some bigger in-person things if that was the desire. So I think there's flexibility there, but I don't think we lose out or
So we can
eat into it for just the virtual sessions.
So we can have these sessions as scheduled, and then the legislative session ends and we kind of see how everything shakes out. And then we can host another series of input sessions over the summer to capture input that would then be provided to the legislature for 2026. And then we could pass that information off, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Zoe.
So first, I think it's always valuable to engage the community to get input. I want to be clear on that. My feedback is around where we are in gathering this input. The agenda is framed to provide high-level input around the strengths and challenges of our public education system and some broad recommendations to the commission on suggestions. I think we're past that conversation. I mean, I think the scope of these questions is really where we were last summer and early fall. And there's information we've captured through the agency's Listen and Learn tour that surfaced a lot of this foundational understanding. I don't think we're building on the conversation to get more refined in a way that's going to help us to move forward and thinking about the future of public education. So I think where we are in the scope of the meeting is misfit in the current context. I think there's been a lot of conversation around our strengths. I think it's better served to kind of reflect back on what those strengths are that we've heard. What are those things we're looking to protect in our system and to strengthen? And how would different policy considerations help us to do that? So I think more of my feedback is we're really thinking about this approach is how are we structuring these input sessions in a way that's really going to help us to take this conversation to the next level. I don't think the current scope, at least of the agenda that I'm seeing, maybe there's more refinement, is going to get us there. And so I'm not sure that there is as much in the current structure of it, and what we're trying to gather will be informing either the next 2 weeks. And I'm not sure that it's going to be as productive in informing our work in making concrete suggestions for the future state. I think the questions are very broad and are more generic. And I think we've gone beyond that in this conversation. And I would like to see more refinement to really be clear around how that input will drive that next phase, because that's really the exciting part. I think we're building on a lot of understanding of our strengths. We're building on a lot of understanding of the challenges. Where we need to go is really thinking about, well, what are some of those changes that we can make to help us to get to the future state? And we can continue to have the conversations, but more of what I'm urging us to do is really think about how this can get us to the next phase of the discussion. And I'm not sure that the scope as designed is getting us there.
I'll just do 2 clarifying pieces around the general just two things. One is the questions at the moment for the sessions are designed where there's one high level question, outcomes you want to see for Vermont public education system and what barriers. And there it moves it down to governance, which is one of the things being floated. And it talks about how those changes would impact students, families, and educators and what would need to be true around consolidation. So that's down a pretty significant grain size, and I think it's pretty relevant. The second grain size is specific funding, which is the other thing being considered. And that is what are concerns or hopes you have about changing the way we fund, and what does it mean for the funding to be equitable. And then there is an additional question around quality, because that piece that is one of the commission's pillars, not necessarily in the current legislation. So I just want to point out that it does, the current proposed input sessions do come down a grain size, and I think would be relevant. That's my perspective. The second reality is that Afton knows, and we have said this in all of our updates to the House and Senate, well, not Senate, because they have not had us in, but we have included this in our updates. The goal was to get these sessions scheduled. They can change the questions the minute we tell them to change the questions. So I just wanted to point out those two things. And I'm also just looking at the time. So I think what we also have to do as a steering group for signing off is obviously make a decision about these input sessions. The second is what to do as a commission. Basically on June 2nd, because that is our next in-person meeting, and it happens right around this end of session. So I wonder, Zoe, I see your hand, and I mean, I want to close the question, but I close the conversation, but I do wonder if the steering group needs to call the question on the input sessions and then talk about June 2nd.
Again, I was just going to respond. I appreciate your clarification, and because I was looking at the press release, which is very general. So I do appreciate that you're looking to drill down further, and I think that's really important. And so from my perspective, what's more important is how we're going to engage in the conversation and what input we're gathering. I think that's a more pertinent question than when we host the sessions. So I appreciate that, and I think that needs to be the focus of the conversation.
Thanks, Zoe. Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the steering group needs to take a vote on a public input session that's already been scheduled. So if someone wants to make a motion to cancel the public input sessions, they can do that. But we don't. It's already on the calendar. We've already, set it in motion. So the action that would need to be taken would be action to stop it. That's just a procedural thing. And so because I think we should just move forward, I was ready to proceed with the conversation about what do we do on the 2nd of June, in which case I would propose that we continue to hold that meeting and we use it as an opportunity to dedicate much of that session to a legislative debrief so that we're clear about what, if anything, has come out of the State House. Because we all need to be clear about that.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate the clarification on mechanically what we're doing. I wasn't thinking along those lines, but I think you're probably right. Jennifer?
I would say the same thing. Yeah, I feel like we probably need to keep the June 2nd meeting. I think we definitely need to keep the June 2nd meeting on the books. But I think we probably also need to keep it broad. And I think to me, it feels right to have a debrief session that really looks at what got passed, what the work is of the commission remaining, and how much time we have to do it, and then kind of plot it out from there.
Thanks, Jennifer. Peter?
I agree with all that. We also heard some comment from some of our educators that if we move a week later in June, it's going to get really challenging for them with final exams and graduations and all that.
Yeah, thank you. That did come up at the meeting. Our next two meetings as scheduled would be June 2nd, which I believe is in White River Junction or Hartford. It's somewhere there. And then the 16th is our virtual meeting. Obviously, we just need to look ahead to the 2nd for now. So the agenda on the 2nd is largely legislative discussion. It's probably as open as that, with room for refinement depending on these next weeks. I would also, I have to reach out to Afton today because our normal check-in falls on Memorial Day, which is not going to happen. So I will be scheduling a time with them probably tomorrow, Wednesday, at least a short update as to today's conversations, because I believe one of the sessions is the 22nd. Nicole, and then
Thanks. I think in addition to the legislative discussion on the 2nd, we should also hear feedback on what's been heard from the public in the sessions over the next 2 weeks, and a decision about the 11th, the session on the 11th.
Yeah.
And I do think it's important that, Megan, if we schedule time with Afton to talk about, how to make clear with members of the public where things are at, in terms of the legislative process, and our process for getting that, lifting up this input, and making sure it's part of the record.
Yeah. Thank you. That's helpful. Jennifer?
We might want to have a steering committee meeting after June 2nd, just to pivot and plot out the next series of meetings. We might want to tack that on. And unfortunately, I hate to do this, but I'm over on another meeting, so I'm going to have to sign off. But thank you guys all. This was a really good discussion.
Thanks, Jennifer. If you, here, she's signing up. I was going to ask if our June 2nd meeting is in the afternoon. So I don't know if the hope is that we would send a doodle poll out to steering group members for another time later that week, probably. Or we can all stay virtually or in person after meet at 4, like meet right after the meeting. Too. Is there a general potential thumbs up for meeting just right there after the meeting on the 4th? Let's see if we can avoid the doodle. And if it's wobbly, then we'll just do a doodle.
If you could verify the location.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm
I
almost
think a
positive
doodle
it is
poll
White
would be
River
good.
Junction.
I agree, having a steering group meeting after the 2nd before the next commission meeting makes sense. Maybe a doodle poll is the best way to handle the scheduling of that.
Thank you. So
And Megan, the meeting is in Hartford. I just don't have a specific location, but it is in Hartford.
thanks, Maureen.
It seems clear it's the interest of the steering committee to move forward with the public engagement sessions. And I think our charge is, what's really important is to make sure that we're framing these conversations in a way that's going to be generative and I think productive to the longer term planning of transforming our education system. So I would and I know Nicole, you had lifted this as a follow-up, but I think that's critically important, that the work that we're doing with Afton is really being able to take stock of the current moment and ensure that we're facilitating a conversation, recognizing that there's still some uncertainty, but that there's these key pillars that there's really broad consensus around. And how are we ensuring that we're engaging in really thoughtful conversations that are supporting that? So I think what's more important is, given this direction, is really the framing. I think it's important to acknowledge the uncertainty. It's important to acknowledge some of the challenges with the timeline, given that, but being able to really, transition for this to be transcendent of this legislative session, I think is going to be important. I also agree that it's important to document questions and concerns that are relevant in the next 2 weeks. So I'm not undermining that, but I think we want to get the commission in a place that's informing the future state. And I really just can't stress how important it is for us to think about how to frame that conversation, and also to make sure that depending on where we are, our facilitators are equipped with an understanding of kind of the different policy directions, to at least be able to communicate intent, if not to support or not, but at least to clarify that, so that there's a framework for the conversation, and that we're approaching that in a way that's informed, because I do think this will be a longer term conversation. So as we make that shift, I really encourage us to make sure that those sessions are organized in a way to be productive, and that people feel like that time is valuable to the future direction.
Thanks, Zoe. With that, I think I'm going to offer an opportunity for public comment for those that have stuck with us. Sorry, we have gone a little bit over, but if there is anyone who's on the call today that wants to share. Ken, I saw you unmuted, and then Mary. So Ken, go ahead. Oh, we can't hear you, Ken.
How about now?
Now we can.
That pesky microphone. I'm old school. I said at the full commission meeting during public input that I was a little fuzzy on the discussion on the public input sessions, but I'm much clearer now. I thank you all for this very thoughtful conversation. And I would say the first public input session being on a Friday afternoon was probably not the best time. In my experience, Friday's a terrible day to schedule anything. But anyways, again, thank you for your thoughtful comments. And I keep hearing 2 weeks, and I'm wondering if that includes conference committees and veto, things like that, that I think is going to maybe run a little longer. So public input could still be valuable for this session, and it certainly will be for the forthcoming session, and especially if the commission is able to coalesce all those comments into some observations about changing in policies. But I would submit that rather than pause, and I think I'm hearing you're not planning on pausing any of the public input or this commission's work, that it may be better, instead of to pause, to publicize. Like, for example, the public input sessions are very clear on the commission's website if you know how to get there in the first place. I can ask my fellow board members at the Friends of Vermont Public Education to send out a notice. We have quite a mailing list, and I know the B groups could probably send out notices, to public notices, say, hey, if you want to provide input, here's the way to do it. But I will say, to close this out, I used to run track in high school, sometimes sprints, sometimes long distance. I mixed it up. And I never once recall hearing the coach say, when you see the finish line, you should stop and catch your breath for a minute, and then take off again so you can have a strong finish. No. It was always go, 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 go. And then when you see the finish line, push as hard as you can to get there. And I think this commission has been doing wonderful work, and I hope it continues to do so. And I hope the public will rise up and voice their opinions in the next 2 weeks or however long it takes. So thank you very much again, as always, for what you're doing. I hope you continue. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ken. Mary?
Yes, thanks, Megan, for the opportunity. And I know I've been with you all morning, so I'll keep this brief. And for those who weren't at the meeting earlier, I might reference a few things that might not be super clear if you weren't present. But the first thing I wanted to say is I was thinking about some of the reactions from commission members about some of the things that were said in the earlier meeting. And so I was thinking about this idea of intention versus impact. Sometimes it's not our intention to say certain things or insinuate certain things, but it still impacts people. And so I wanted to just say, since I know a lot of you, I'm in this struggle with you, that if any of my comments, to this morning or along the way, have impacted any of you,
that I want to apologize for that, because clearly this is a very charged body of work. Your efforts are not, are seen by all of us who are bearing witness to you whenever we are here, and also just in the media and other places. So I just want to say, for me personally, I want it to be known that I do stand with you all. While we are also out here in the public, working our full-time jobs, taking care of our families, and trying to do the good work that we do in our advocacy, as much as you all are doing that as well. There are several of us here, I will say myself included, who bring a lot of knowledge, skills, and expertise around education, and certainly around equity-centered frameworks to education. And when I think about what's happening nationally, but even in the state right now, around this assault on the ideas of DEI, which I no longer will call it that. I think we need to say it's diversity, equity, inclusion. That is exactly what many of us have been talking about. So I was pleased to hear some folks this morning pivoting to this understanding about what does it mean to have diverse voices? How do we inclusion being this idea of how do we allow people to be at the table with us, which ultimately results in the constructs of equity that we all say we hold near and dear. But sometimes what happens for those of us who are not having those lived experiences of harm, it's hard sometimes to really understand what that is. So I appreciate that. I heard in this meeting this morning that people are wrestling with that. And I also just want to say one last piece. I am not by any means aware of, and I think Megan, you had references this morning, that there's a lot that's happening behind the scenes around how you are reaching out to different stakeholders. And I don't know all of the workings of that. I think my main concern has always been from the beginning, the composition of the commission. And so I think now that we are, it sounds to me, pivoting to this idea of making sure those voices are in the conversation, that we can understand what it meant from the beginning when the commission did not have representation of those people here on the screen. And the last thing I'll say, I thought I just said the last thing, but I look at the Dropbox link on the website, so I did find it. And maybe Ken already referenced this, or someone else did, but I think what would be helpful, I'm looking at the AOE website, right, where it says join a virtual listening session, is to have a little bit more of a summation of what this is for and what it's about. And maybe Jennifer, I think, talked about this morning, because I look at this, I understand what it is, but folks might not know what will actually happen at one of those meeting dates, and it might make it more clear. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mary. All right, seeing no other hands, I believe we are adjourned. I should put that for a motion to adjourn. Last time I just adjourned us.
I'll move, we adjourn.
Thanks, Peter.
I'll second.
All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Great.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.